Let me move on to literacy and basic skills. So again, this is one of those trying to capture the big picture in terms of the client data. Essentially, the numbers have been slowly increasing, and the proportion, unlike the employment services numbers, in literacy and basic skills, this area has a slightly higher proportion of clients, of the provincial clients, in comparison to their share of the provincial population. Whereas the region as a whole has a considerably lower share, like it's around 10% less, around 41% of central region clients compared to the province, but the share of population in the central region is almost 52%. So there's a big gap, whereas Simcoe and Muskoka, it plays out the other way. In terms of service provider stream, so there's really only two figures that show up at the board level. There's the Anglophone stream and Francophone stream. In terms of the service provider stream, pretty consistent proportions in terms of community agency, community college, and school boards across the three categories. Just at the local level here, Simcoe and Muskoka, just a slightly smaller proportion of community college compared to the region, but nothing significant. By age, again, very similar proportions when you compare the board and the region and Ontario. Slightly older population in Simcoe and Muskoka, same number of youth, but just in terms of the two adult populations, slightly fewer 25 to 44-year-olds, slightly more 45 to 64-year-olds. And women, so females, almost 60% compared to 40% males in terms of the client base. By designated groups, here here I've shown all the designated groups and just showed the percentages. And again, I think the one that always stands out for me in Simcoe and Muskoka is the higher proportion of persons with disability. And so here it's 30%. You can see, it's not too far from the provincial average, but I know that that's always been the case with Simcoe and Muskoka. Some of the other ones, I don't know. Certainly, of course, the Francophone is going to be slightly higher because of the larger Francophone population here. The visible minority figure, I don't think we can put any credence in that. Only 4%, or even all the provincial and regional numbers are off in terms of their share of the population. So, for some reason, we just can't rely on that figure.
Tom,
yeah.
A burning question.
A burning question.
Get past.
Wow, it's the first one in 4 years.
Well, there you go. So if I go back to the LBS learners by age and by gender, I just was saying to Susan that I'm surprised that the percentage of females is higher than males. And I draw a couple of conclusions for both sides as to why I think so. Immediately, I think, well, maybe is it because there's more females that are staying at home and not involved in employment. But then on the other side of the argument, and I'm going to make a sweeping sexism statement, that I think overall my thought would have been that women would be more apt to reach out and seek support. Can you provide any insight into that? What the rationale would be for the higher percentage?
Yeah, no, that was my first thought too.
Okay.
There's that, but also women will more likely end up in jobs that require a certain amount of, say, literacy numeracy than males. Like, let's say those who have barriers to employment in terms of the entry-level jobs that they would have to they can access. Males have more options in terms of manufacturing and construction, where they may not require as high level of literacy compared to somebody in a service sector job, office job, retail, customer service and all that. So I think that's part of it.
Okay.
But I think the other part is certainly the as you say, that like who's going to stop and ask for directions, right? Yeah. That you all know that joke, right? Okay, so like like men just don't ask for direction and they don't ask for help.
That's right.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, just to say that, I know again I made a generalization in terms of those jobs. We did see in the apprenticeship sector, as we were asking employers about the impact of technology on skilled trades, that certainly in the manufacturing sector, it's very clear that the skill requirements are really starting to increase. And generally, the reliance on all kinds of digital supports, whether you're a horticultural technician or a cleaner or whatever, like it's increased significantly. By educational attainment, perhaps not surprising, but much larger. 70% have either high school or less in terms of the client group at the local level. A bit lower elsewhere, but but in the same range. Source of income, again, kind of distributed between around a quarter have no source of income, almost around a quarter to a third are employed. 19% Ontario works. So those are the three biggies, and again, similar to the rest of the province. Learners' goal paths. So I suppose the one thing about Simcoe and Muskoka compared to elsewhere, a smaller proportion who choose post-secondary as a goal path, and more who are choosing secondary school as a goal path, secondary school credit. Again, very small differences from this year and last year. Labor force attachment, so that's just giving us a bit more detail. So 60% were unemployed. All right. I can't imagine you can read this, but it's so I could say just about anything about it. But what this does, it shows the different goal paths by labor force attachment, and I guess what I'll say is there's nothing particularly surprising. So maybe the big example is if we look at those who are unemployed, then there's a significant number who obviously are seeking employment as their goal path. Those who are underemployed actually are very high, like 70% are seeking employment as a goal path. Whereas if you're employed full-time, then all of a sudden it's less, of course, not the employment goal path is only one of the choices, but post-secondary becomes important. So now this data starts becoming a bit weaker because we're slicing and dicing it into very small categories, but it does give you a better sense of already anticipating for a person's labor force attachment what their likely goals are in terms of why they seek out literacy and basic skills services. Sources of referral, we started getting this data starting last year, and essentially it's much the same, that the main source of referrals are through informal word of mouth, other structured formal referrals, and EO service providers or EO literacy basic skills providers. And that's been more or less the same as last year and across the three areas. Out-referrals are primarily to health and educational services. Slight difference, it's more or less even at the board level, Simcoe and Muskoka, between health and educational services, much more educational services elsewhere. And other programs, there's kind of a wide range of dispersal of out referrals. I won't get into the details. LBS Outcomes. We have the main two categories are employed full-time and education, and unfortunately the biggest category is an unemployed outcome, 26%, but of course a lot of them were unemployed to begin with, right? So that number has gone down from there when they came in. And I think that covers literacy and basic skills. So I was going to move on to second career.